right on one and headed home just after 8:30 a.m. He'd emailed his teachers and told them he was sick and texted a friend that he'd forgotten some books at home and was going to get them. What he didn't know is that his mother had plans to go home unexpectedly as well, and she left again around 10:45 a.m., with Griffiths hiding in the closet until she'd gone. Once she'd left the house again, he emerged. Even though he didn't yet have a driver's license, Griffiths took the keys to one of the family cars and headed to Ellie's house. According to his phone location records, Griffiths arrived at the Gould's residence at 10:53 a.m., at which point he entered and ultimately strangled Ellie to unconsciousness. She scratched his neck deeply in self-defense, leaving noticeable angry red marks. Griffiths then ended her life by stabbing her 13 times, mostly to the left of her neck, with a knife from her family's own kitchen. Prior to leaving the scene about 1 hour later at 11:51 a.m., Griffiths placed Ellie's hand around the handle of the knife and placed it back in a wound in her neck, in what seemed like an attempt to stage an accident or suicide scene. He soon started a WhatsApp chat with a bunch of friends and wrote, quote, "I think everyone's noticed I've been really down lately and I need to tell you why. Me and Ellie are going to go on a break and see what happens after exams. As well as this, my dad has cancer and my nan has been having heart problems. I've been so stressed lately and I don't know how to cope with it. I've been scratching myself around my neck area, and as this group has kind of become my best friends, I don't know who else to talk to. I'm going to see Miss Todd now and explain everything that's been happening." Other texts from that afternoon included Ellie, and texts to members of their friend group claiming he wasn't able to get a hold of her. Griffiths next drove the car home, but left on foot after changing his clothes, walking to a wooded area to get rid of bloody towels and rags he had taken with him from the Gould's house. He returned within 20 minutes, then caught a ride to school from a neighbor, talking with him about his stress and self-harming behavior. Once there, he told the nurse the same things, and she had him call for his mother to come pick him up, and she did, and later dropped him off at a friend's house, where police would ultimately find him a few hours later. Just after 3 p.m. on Friday, May 3rd, 2019, Ellie's father came home from work, and instead of getting his weekend started, he walked in and found his daughter dead. The scene in the kitchen was bloody, and Ellie was lying face down on the floor with her hand on the knife. He would later say, quote, "The image of Ellie lying there on the floor has haunted me ever since that afternoon. It fills my thoughts when trying to sleep and hijacks my mind when trying to go about my day." Foul play was not immediately suspected by her parents, and they tried to find ways in their mind that their daughter could have wound up dead when she was supposed to be at school. Her friend would soon tell police that she'd received a text from Ellie at 11:45 a.m. saying that she didn't need a ride, and so her friend didn't come pick her up. But it became apparent that Griffiths had sent that text and had used Ellie's finger to unlock her phone after he had already killed her. Police had immediately asked if Ellie had a boyfriend, and her mother said, in hindsight, it was evident police had a feeling what had occurred in the kitchen on Springfield Drive. Investigators at the scene were confident this was a homicide, a crime of passion, given the brutality and up-close and personal nature of the murder. With verification from the Goulds that Ellie did have a boy in her life, and a report from a neighbor who had seen a lanky teen boy at the Goulds' front door just before 11 that day, they dug further with the friends until they knew where he was. Tom Griffiths was just 7 miles away at the friend's house where his mom had dropped him off, and when police picked him up, he quickly asked about Ellie, saying he hadn't heard from her that morning and had been at home studying. They took note of the fresh red scratches along his face, and he was arrested around 6 p.m. He laid out how his morning had gone, saying that after dodging his mother, he talked to a neighbor about his stress level and about scratching his neck as a means to relieve it. Griffiths said the neighbor drove him back to school where he spoke to the nurse. However, police were finding flaws in his story, and over the weekend, as they continued to question him, they were also piling up evidence against him. They heard from a member of the friend group that she had noticed his location had shown him near Ellie's earlier that day. They also received dash cam footage from a bus showing Griffiths driving his car away from Ellie's house and back toward Dairy Hill 2 miles away at 11:56 a.m. The router at the Griffiths home provided police a timeline of when Tom was and wasn't there that day, and one anomaly they noted was the 18-minute absence recorded shortly after he returned home. 9 minutes walking distance away, searchers located a bag full of towels, rags, and an apron from the scene of the murder. His home was searched, and by Monday, 3 days after Ellie had been killed, the lab had already determined that blood found on a pair of Tom's shoes belonged to Ellie Gould. He had provided police with no explanation as to how this could have happened, and maintained the story he had already given them, which had not placed him anywhere near Ellie's blood. He claimed he hadn't seen her for days. Though he had been arrested as soon as police had located him and saw the scratches, authorities now had enough evidence to charge Griffiths with Ellie's murder and keep him in custody. For weeks, he seemed unable to accept that he had murdered the girl he loved. In August 2019, Thomas Griffiths pleaded guilty to the murder of Eleanor Rose Gould at his plea hearing, and at his sentencing 3 months later in November, attempted to offer up some semblance of an explanation of what happened between them that day in the kitchen. While Griffiths sat quietly avoiding eye contact, his attorney read a statement of, quote, heartfelt remorse the teen had prepared. He wrote that he had driven over to Ellie so they could study that morning, and they did, but got into a fight, after which he blacked out, only vaguely remembering being conscious of choking her, then waking up to her having already been stabbed. Griffiths wrote, quote, ever since that dreadful day I have tried to come to terms with what I have done. All I feel is remorse for Ellie and her family after I took such a special daughter and sister away from them. I feel confused and angry at myself at how I was able to hurt someone so special to me and others. I've never been in trouble before. At the time, my mental health was not good, and I wish I had recognized this. As well as this, I would like to apologize to my family who are totally devastated by my actions and what happened. I've truly let myself down and hope one day I'll be able to explain to myself and others why this happened. I am so sorry. I know my apologies and explanations will never be enough, but I hope in time I can show how truly sorry I am. When his sentence was handed down, Ellie's family and friends were devastated overall because although he received a life sentence, his minimum term is just 12.5 years, with the judge pointing out that, quote, the pain and terror she must have suffered in her last moments as your frenzied knife attack continued is beyond imagining. Not able to face up to what you had done, you then attempted to cover up this dreadful crime. First, and most chillingly, you left Ellie on the floor with the knife embedded in her throat and her hand around the handle of the knife. I have no doubt that you arranged the scene in order that would it appear to those who found Ellie that she had been killed, not by another person, but instead by her own hand or in some terrible accident. Indeed, that was what her father thought when he found her. There can be no more dreadful scene for any parent to contemplate than that which confronted Ellie's father when he came home that day from work. The effects of your actions have not only snuffed out the life of this talented girl, but loaded pain on her friends and family. Given his youth and his first-time offender status, Griffiths was eligible to receive the minimum sentence possible, though due to the brutality of the crime, it is expected that he will likely not be released on his first attempt. If he were, however, he would be back on the streets around 30 years old. In their grief, Ellie's close friends began to petition the government for compulsory self-defense classes to be taught in school, and have had some success in their undertaking. They feel that if Ellie had had some training, she may have been able to escape her killer, and think that schools are an ideal place to teach children such skills. In response to the minimum 12-year sentence currently in place for juvenile killers in Britain, the Goulds appealed for Griffiths' sentence to be increased, contending it was unduly lenient. However, no review was granted. Ellie's parents felt that Griffiths' sentence should be at least 17 years, 1 year in prison for each year Ellie got to live. They next began to campaign for tougher sentences for juveniles who commit murder, and they achieved that to a degree in March 2021 when the so-called Ellie's Law was passed, raising the minimum sentence for juvenile killers to 14 years, with possible sentences up to 27 years. This does not change Griffiths' sentence. However, the law did remove his and other juvenile killers' right to have their sentence reviewed when 50% has been completed. However, he'll now be required to serve all 12.5 years before applying for parole. They next plan to focus on increasing the minimum sentence for life killers who use a weapon from the scene of the murder, like Griffiths did, because it's currently 15 years. However, if the weapon is brought to the scene, the minimum sentence in Britain is 25 years, a difference the Goulds plan to drastically reduce. Regarding their recent success, Ellie's mom said, quote, "I think she would be very proud. She'd say, 'Well done, Mom. You've achieved something amazing.'" As always, thanks for listening. Be back soon with an all-new episode, but until then, lovelies, don't be scared.